Adam Weber, welcome. Thank you so much for joining Jess Yuen and myself here on the People Leader Accelerator Podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm happy to be here. Jess, it's nice to meet you. This is like our getting to know each other. And Andrew, I remember when you pre-show at the time you joined my podcast, hearing you on your solopreneur journey and like what a cool thing you had built. And I left feeling really inspired. And that was part of the spark that gave me the confidence to go do my own thing. And it's been great to stay in touch since then and support each other as well. So I'm happy to be here.
I love that. I'm wondering for our audience who are in the maybe minority of people who have not yet encountered you, whether through 15.5 or your other work, could you share a bit more about yourself and your background for our audience?
Sure. Well, at my heart, I feel like I'm a tech founder. That's where my kind of career really took off. I spent 10 years wandering around entry-level job to entry-level job, mostly like not bringing my best to work and trying to find my purpose. And I just sort of like about 15 years ago, started my first tech company with a college student. He was just 1 week out of college. And he and I started our first tech company, and it really did change my life. It was originally a mobile app development company. And as it grew, I started to fall in love with leadership and culture. And then we sold that business and started a culture and leadership company. And so where we measured cultures, and then we coached executives on how to build high performance teams, how to spot turnover issues, how to kind of listen to your employees to find answers to really complex problems. And so we kind of bridged that gap. And then I sold that business to 15.5, and that's where I became the Chief Evangelist at 15.5. And during that time, all along, I started to realize in myself the power of coaching. Like I had executive coaches while I was growing these tech companies. They started to impact me. And in the middle of one of those sessions, I was like, I feel like I would rather be on the other side of this conversation. I like being in service to other people and supporting other people and having deep, meaningful one-on-one conversations. And so while I was at 15.5, I started my coaching practice. I stayed for almost 4 years and then launched my coaching practice just 1.5 years ago. And that brings me to today, which is where, I do a lot of culture and leadership work. I do a lot of one-on-one development for chief people officers is like one bucket. And then the other bucket is like CEO founders. So those are kind of my two main categories. But really any executive, a lot of first-time execs who get thrown onto a leadership team of a high-growth company and the pressure and demands are incredible and they're supposed to grow really, really quickly. Those are people that I love to work with as well. So
I think we have a lot in common in terms of who we coach in that audience.
Share a little bit more, Jess. I feel like we haven't shared much on this podcast of like what your practice is. It's kind of the same two groups, right?
It's a similar overlap. It's where I started was with chief people officers. I think having been one, it was sort of the bread and butter. And then expanding to people who care deeply about people and culture and how that impacts a business. And then naturally extended to your point around almost any executive, because at some point I started coaching CFOs because they might have held the HR bucket, COOs. For me, I usually think about it in like 3 pillars because there's sort of the self part of how do I show up as my best self, and often overlaps like life coaching types of conversations. Like, am I sleeping? Am I exercising? Am I getting sort of the fundamentals in place? And then do I understand how I'm prioritizing and using my time as best as possible? And then I do a pillar around team coaching. So how am I actually leading my team and running one-on-ones and department meetings and things like that? And then the last pillar is around culture and company and scaling of that. And how do you think about how those go together? And so operating cadences or thinking about communication lines and those types of topics tend to come up more often there.
That's fantastic. I love that. That's a great way to articulate the work too.
Structured. Jess has structure.
Yeah. And you have to have 3. If you're a consultant, you have to have like your...
You can't have 4. It feels uncomfortable.
Right. Actually, Adam, I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about your approach. Do you have a specific structure to how you do coaching with your mentees?
I do think part of like the entrepreneur at heart in me is like that I have this really wide range of people that I support. And so the work is really different based on the person. But I would say a couple of things that are like consistently true for me is really early on, I facilitate this vision session where we build a vision for 3 years in the future. And we don't hold it too tightly. I just create the space and permission to dream big and see what's there. And then we look at what was created, and it sort of serves as a guidepost of where we're actually headed. Like, what is the life that you actually want to live? What is the kind of type of leader you want to be? And then what gets in the way of that? And then we meet every other week. I get into the storyline of those businesses. For some leaders, it is very practical. It's like, I want to improve some habits in my life, or I keep running into roadblocks with my leadership and I keep getting stuck and I don't know why. And we try to like untangle those issues, how to have honest conversations. One thing I do a lot of is helping people decide in advance how they want meetings to go. If you're an executive in a venture-backed company and you've got to show up to a board meeting and you're 70% to goal, that's a hard meeting. Or an executive team meeting where you know it's going to be heavy and loaded and there's tension in the air in the room. We talk in advance, like, who do you want to be in this meeting? And who are you going to be when the very thing that you know is going to happen that you're most afraid of does happen? We kind of prepare in advance, and then, a person to kind of hold accountable as well afterwards. That's a lot of it. I've got other people though who really need more like help with strategy, and which is what I used to do. So I love building strategy and helping people think through, like, I've got 1,000 ideas of what to focus on right now, and I'm overwhelmed and I'm shifting too fast. And it's like trying to get to the root of what creates focus for them and what creates focus for others too. And so for some, it's that. I do early stage consulting too and advising. So like a third of my clients are early stage companies trying to get traction. And it taps into a totally different version of me that loves sales and loves creating interest in the market. And what's cool about some of those is as they grow, the work transitions from tactical to the inner work, and like really helping them develop as a leader. First, it's like survive, and then it's kind of grow as a leader, that sort of thing too. Grow beyond yourself. So it is all over the place, and I kind of love it. I think it's fun. I have a couple groups where I do team coaching too. That's new for me. I'm just dabbling in that, and I am like loving it. I coach multiple execs on the executive team, and then we're kind of picking topics and then facilitating group-based sessions to build trust and psychological safety and how to give candid feedback. And I'm really enjoying that work too.
You get to see each of these individuals separately, and then how they come together and like interpret what is happening as a group versus individually is often really fascinating, of like, what's the level of awareness of this group and how do we gel together and collaborate together. I saw recently that you posted a really insightful ebook. And can you share more about this ebook? How did you create it, come about it? I think it was just so fascinating of how you developed what was in it. It speaks to some of these leadership challenges that you work with your clients on.
Yeah. I coach about 15 people at a time, and 5 of them were chief people officers, all in pretty high growth environments and pretty high pressure, high stress environments. And so when I got to the end of that first year, I was like, this could be interesting to really look at. And, I transcribe every single call that I do. And so I took the transcriptions from 100 hours. And like, what is kind of the big story that is common amongst all of them? It actually originally started as like a gift to them. Like I sent it to each of them individually, and just to kind of normalize the experience for them too. So that was the foundation of what came of the ebook.
And I saw that there were 4 parts to this ebook, and each kind of tackled, I think, a topic that we deal with, and especially for our audience, a number of people who are in the chief people officer role or close to it, or thinking about it down their career path one day. And the first topic was around strategy and how to shift from being a fixer to an architect. Can you share a little bit more about what that means, and what are some of the key shifts that you've seen your clients making to be able to kind of go from one to the other?
Yeah. Like all 4 of these topics are like quite complicated too, is what I'm realizing now, because the heart behind, if you just talk blanket level, the average great HR leader, they usually got into HR for some altruistic reason, especially the ones who rise all the way up to chief people officer. It wasn't like they were like, I really want to spend my whole career in HR. It usually like found them in some way. And then in a lot of those environments, they are people that are really good at jumping into messy situations and creating some calm in the midst of it. So they're kind of fixers by nature. And what happens though is as businesses scale, and as that role goes from HR manager to HR business partner to VP of HR to VP of people to chief people officer, the role starts to shift, but a lot of times the behaviors of the person haven't corresponded with that. So they naturally still kind of jump in and solve versus kind of delegate and trust. So that's like part of, I think, what showed up in that section for me was the challenge of someone who tactically also is putting out fires all the time. They spend their time dealing with all of these challenges, and then they'll walk into the executive team meeting and have to immediately elevate and get above that noise that they're living in on the day-to-day as well.
Yeah. Are there any tactics or tips that you find are kind of shortcuts or a way to be able to get in from one to the other? Because context switching is something so many executives are dealing with. What are some of the things that you've encountered with your clients that have worked for them?
I do a lot of mantras with them, which is like a phrase to represent who you are in the executive room. Like before you walk in, couple deep breaths, say the word that you're deciding, like calm, steady presence, or above the noise, or outside the chaos. Maintain your altitude. These are different ones that came up over the course of the year, right? Where it's like helping that person who is like running so fast, and then they need to pause and, maintain their altitude, which is like the way that I say, like, I am working on the business, not in the business. And when we think about chief people officers, I feel like that skill is so important because most executives represent a function, like a specific function inside the business. The chief people officer, part of the very best ones add value when they leave. They're not representing their function. They're representing the total of the business. And so that, though, takes that altitude perspective. You have to get out of your function and into that higher altitude to help connect the dots and spot collaboration issues and spot where the VP of sales and the head of product are in conflict and no one's saying it out loud. Like, that's your job.
One of the things that Andrew and I talk about a lot is like taking more of that CEO perspective and not staying in the HR hat. And I think this goes for all executives, frankly, of like, don't sit in just your department role or your function viewpoint. You should be responsible for the entire company.
Patrick Lencioni from 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I feel like I've shared this 2.5-minute clip with more people than ever read his books, which is millions, that talks about team number one. As an effective executive, regardless of what function you're in, you should be looking out for the best interests of the organization as a whole, rather than advocating for your individual function or team. Because if everybody advocates for their individual function or team, then you get, cross purposes and all sorts of uncomfortable conflict.
Absolutely.
Which happens all the time. This one team concept is so critical. Like with my clients, when I talk about that team one, is I always have one empty seat in the room too, that is like that final member of the executive team, which is like, it's safe to say anything in this room. It's safe to challenge and push. We're not trying to point out you are the problem. We all are working on the business together, and it's safe. What we don't do is like, we go in that room and then we leave and commiserate down with our team. That is like the height of dysfunction inside of cultures. But we say what needs said. We basically have a fiduciary duty to the business to debate with vigor when we disagree. We recognize business is messy. The CEO has to make hard decisions. My job is to advocate and represent what I believe in full. And then I understand that ultimately it's not my job to make that decision, though. And what happens too often in that executive room is people withhold. They lose their own psychological safety and trust, and they don't say the thing to represent why they disagree with the decision. The decision gets made, and they're not on board, both emotionally or conceptually, because they never felt heard. And then they leave the room, and then they can't defend the idea to the rest of the company. That is not great leadership. That is a lower bar for leadership.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about with these executive team dynamics, which is actually the second key theme in your ebook.
Yeah.
It's one of the most complicated elements of, right, how do you create a place that people feel safe? You have a CEO who couldn't feasibly fire anybody in the room at any moment that they so see fit. If we were lucky enough to go to one of your group coaching sessions, what might we experience in a team that maybe is having some dysfunction, maybe doesn't have full psychological safety? How do you start to unwind that or build that?
I just did one. And what we really focused on in the beginning, like where we're starting from scratch, is to create safety to share. And so what we did was we started practicing, like you basically are teaching people how to be a coach. How do you hear a thing and not solution or minimize. And so how do we here receive, especially when people take risks? So if people are willing to kind of be vulnerable and share a thing, how do we embrace that as a gift? And so what we did in this group session was we asked people to think about a time where they felt like they didn't belong or have a sense of belonging, whether it was at work, whether it was at home, church, family, whatever it may be, right? And tell us how they felt in that experience. And then gave everybody else a little script of things they could say back. Like, how do you respond when someone's vulnerable? So that'd be like a phase one, where it's more like just practicing. I'm an executive and I am taking a leap of trust to be vulnerable. And then for the other executives, like, so how do we handle that? And then what we'll do is just keep dialing up what that level looks like, making basically the topic more focused on hot pressing issues inside the company too, so it feels a little bit more like, okay, now that we've practiced it in some safe ways, now let's put it to the test of like the real world, like things we're dealing with right now.
I love this piece because what you're pulling at too is how do you actually listen? Like really listen to what someone is putting out there, as opposed to trying to immediately respond with your reaction or your thought or your other solution or the reason why it is or is not true. Have you encountered executives who are like, come to a session like this and are like, nah, I don't really want to open up. You can tell that they're sort of withholding still, like, because I feel like that is the trickiest.
And the other part with that too is you just have to kind of meet people where they are. I usually try to hang with it. Like we'll do a practice and it doesn't land, like where they don't kind of share anything. It's like, hey, that was great. Can you take one more attempt at it and kind of lean into this element of it? So it feels soft to them too. But then I also try to redirect them where they're like actively participating. But, so far I've only been at this a year and a half full time. And so far, most of the people have been quite hungry for the growth. I think so many people, when they encounter coaching too, there is this really amazing like release valve that happens when all this pressure they've put on themselves starts to release as well.
And I think the setup that you have for your coaching practice helps too, of you're coaching them individually before you're getting into group session with them too.
Yeah. Also, I will say a lot of the like addressing would be more like in the one-on-one after. Like, hey, felt like there was a gap in your vulnerability compared to everybody else's. Did I misread that? That sort of thing.
There's a concept called work with the willing. I'm interpreting Adam as like, hey, these organizations are asking for the help. So you have at least one, maybe several advocates that are ready to go there with that.
Yeah.
I guess I'm comparing and contrasting to some of my work with investor-backed organizations where the investor is encouraging the leadership team to do this self-assessment. How are things going? How do we optimize? How could things go even better? And it just tends to feel a little different when your owner, investor is suggesting that here's a resource that can help you all. If they're not asking for it themselves, there tends to be a little bit more internal resistance to it.
Yeah.
Not to say that it can't work or don't do it. It's just a different
feeling. Yeah, for sure.
There were two other major themes that you had in this ebook that you wrote, one around culture and one around emotional labor. The headlines don't get any less weighty on what's going on externally in the world. And internally, there's so much change happening in so many of the organizations that we work with. Some of the things you mentioned in the book are around like just how much individuals are carrying, and boundaries was a word that came up as well, and how much to care. And I hear this a lot from executives. It's hard because I care too much. What are some of the topics that you've encountered in this bucket of emotional labor, and how have you helped executives to work through them?
There's a reason why this is like the grand finale of the book, because I do think this is the dominant topic that comes up for me in coaching, especially just like with your work as a coach too. Like, I think this happens too as a coach, where it's like when you hold a confidential space for other people and then they share things that are heavy, it's like there's a transfer of weight that does happen. And that happens to chief people officer executives all the time. I have heard some things that are heartbreaking and shocking, and experiences of an employee tragedy where they had to come alongside and come up with something that they never would have thought they would have had to face. Or a leader who had to lay off 50 people in 1 year. There is an emotional toll that happens. Like part of what you're signing up for in this role is like you're leaning into the most difficult aspects of leadership and doing it for your job. And so there is a toll to that. And then this tension of like, I'm a person who cares deeply about people. And then I also am the one who has to like deliver the hardest news too. I think healthy habits and boundaries are like the two big common things that I'm challenging people with. And part of the healthy habits is like a gratitude practice is really big, not in like the toxic positivity sense, in the kind of rooting yourself in deeper truths, giving yourself some reminders of like where things sit in the bigger perspective. Just like, how are you taking care of yourself? What are your ways to kind of like get out of this one moment, maintain that altitude and perspective, and also like nurture and care for yourself in the midst of a really challenging job that doesn't always shut off super well either.
When you talk about boundaries, I think for many executives, the idea of boundaries is typically like, well, 9 to 5, or it's like hours or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But you're smiling because you know as well, like that's not always what is meant. It's the first thing that comes up, but it's not necessarily what boundaries means. When you think about boundaries, either examples of them or definition of it, what comes to mind of how you help your clients set boundaries or figure out what boundaries work for them?
I think one is like, say, for example, it's a week where there's a lot of layoffs, or it doesn't take a lot. You could just have to do one. And like asking them like, hey, what's your plan for right after that? What's next? What's the very next thing on your calendar after that? And can you just give yourself some space? I think midday breaks is a big one. The start of all my coaching calls, I do what's called a color check-in. It's a way to do self-inventory of how are you doing on the inside, and then help me understand what I'm working with. So it's like a stoplight, green, yellow, red, right? Green is like, this is my best day. I could handle a problem and face it in a way that I'm proud of. And red is like, if a problem came right now, I'd be an absolute disaster. I don't feel like my calm, centered self. So part of what I want to do with my clients is help them understand where they are themselves so that then they can have tools of what to do. So for example, if I have a client who shows up that is red and they know they're red and they can't face a challenge and it's a very challenging job, it might be like, look, I'm not saying take a week off. I'm just saying it's 10 a.m. on a Tuesday right now. Is there anything you can do to give yourself some space in the middle of this day so that you can reassess? Because when you're in that red space, even the smallest problem can feel like dramatically exaggerated. It's like you're at the bottom of a mountain looking up. And what I'm trying to do is make that transition where you're at the top looking out. And so you've got perspective, you can solve things appropriately. And sometimes that does look like, I know you got a busy, stressful job. I know you're in venture tech. I know you got a board meeting. I get all that stuff. You also have 3 hours right now. Like maybe this is a moment. Just pause on them for just a second and give yourself a little breathing room. Give yourself a little bit of margin to get where you want to go.
Yeah. And I'm hearing too, you're thinking about the energy levels of your clients.
Yeah.
That's often something I will do with my clients is just having them track for like a week in a very lightweight way of like what things increase their energy and what things brought it down. And so something like having to have a termination conversation that brings it way down, and
it's going to bring it down.
What's the thing that I can do to kind of buoy that, or at least kind of not bring myself even further down with what I have planned later in the day. And so having that awareness of like, what are the things that bring us up and what are the things that bring us down, and how do we balance that out? Because when we go too far down, it takes much more to bring us back out, and too far down really is burnout.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I think, you and I probably see a good amount of with clients that come our way.
Yeah, the idea of checking in with anyone, whether it's a leader, a CEO, a head of HR, figure out like, are things going well? Are things not going well? How do we get on the right track? How your body and your mind responds to stimuli gives you some pretty strong indications there. Behind me, for our millions of viewers in parts afar, there is a letterpress drawing of a colander that our good friend Marie Such created for the 2-day retreat that we did for the People Leader Accelerator alumni community to help embed the idea of allowing emotion and strife to flow through you. A colander, let that emotion flow through you rather than soaking it in like a sponge. So there may be a mantra there somewhere, like the colander versus sponge.
And have you all read Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul?
No.
Honestly, the first chapter of that book is that concept right there. It's kind of this like, don't block it, let it go through you, allow yourself to feel and experience it. Because if you suppress it, it just finds its way back. It's not going anywhere. It's just hiding.
Our show notes are going to be so good. We're going to reference this Michael Singer book. We're going to give you a picture of a colander. I didn't know what that was until Marie gave me the letterpress thing. We'll include a link to the ebook where you share, the key themes from your coaching work. Adam, I'd actually love to ask you a couple questions about your journey as a HR tech founder and leader. From that seat as a founder, CEO for a good stretch of the journey, Adam, what's your perspective on what good HR looks like?
Being like a right hand to the CEO is really critical. That trusted voice who's also thinking about the business in total at all times. It depends on size, but in general, right, especially if you think about how tech companies grow, is they start with this like very organic culture that is an orbit of the energy of the founder. And I think what great HR does is they can harness that and create systems and structures that recreate that at scale. And they can do that at infinite scale, basically, right? Like it can go all the way to the tens and hundreds of thousands of employees. And you do that through things like capturing stories and retelling stories and reminding people of like the goodness that we do in the world. A lot of the work that I view as like good HR is, do we have the fundamentals in place to teach the learned skill of leadership and the learned skill of management versus thrusting people into leadership roles without giving them those skills to develop? And then once we have that in place, the very best HR teams leverage management to execute their strategies. They don't try to do it inside of their department. I think if we're talking what world-class is to me is that it is a web that is basically a fully cross-departmental. It makes the life of managers better, and managers want to execute and bring to life the big visions of the people ops team. I'm big on vision and values to me that feel very vibrant and alive. And like, is it clear where we're going as a business? Is it clear what good we do in the world? Is it clear how we're going to treat each other while it's happening? And can we give examples of what that how looks like? And then does every single person in this company understand what their role is towards that? It's interesting because I've been both a chief people officer and at a company that is also measuring cultures, right? And so I'm also looking at hundreds of other businesses at the same time. And I was just like perpetually struck by how few employees understand what is expected of them and how frustrated management is about it, as if they have no agency to change that situation. I do think too often, like what best looks like in people leadership is like creating role clarity throughout the organization. And then if I were to just go real quick into the future and say what I think's coming is that how quickly AI is changing productivity and output, that organizational design, I think, is going to be more important than ever from the people ops function. What roles are no longer necessary or no longer necessary the way they are today? And how do we quickly reshape those roles to be what the business actually needs? And how do we train up people inside of the company and leverage the assets that we have to like execute in a totally different way too?
Maybe I can extract a few themes from that for the audience. I'm hearing consigliere to the CEO. So the sounding board for the CEO, or the CEO may have their own emotions and feelings and fears and concerns, and the HR leader is someone that can be your sounding board if you have the right person. I think I heard storyteller, telling the story of what the organization is trying to accomplish, translating that throughout the organization, creating linkages in all policies and practices and programs throughout the org. Web weaver. I don't know. I don't like the spider imagery there, but like the web of it all being interconnected. It should all be mutually supporting. If you are managing those policies and programs and practices and what are we trying to achieve, then it all supports each other. What I didn't hear was compliance. What I didn't hear was run payroll. What I didn't hear was benefits expert. I don't know. Can we take that for granted and say like, of course that needs to happen? But these other areas are where you make your greatest contribution as tell me if I'm putting words into your mouth.
Yeah.
An internal management consultant.
You're not putting words in my mouth. Payroll, benefits, compliance, those are also my known weakest areas of HR. And so like from the get-go, when I got in, I was just like, I'm going to have somebody else figure that stuff out who can just kind of check those boxes. I just like the aspects of HR that are focused on creating cultural transformation, activating the employee base, and then getting out like the things that are blocking the culture, like solving those things.
Yeah. And I heard you use the word leverage a few times throughout this conversation. And I think that's one of the things that I hear in the themes of what you're supporting here is like when you play the consigliere to the CEO, there's a lot of leverage in being able to move the organization in a direction when you have that trust and you have that relationship. Whereas while benefits is very important to get right and very important to have an expert on the team who can manage through it and do it smoothly, it is more of a one-for-one than it is necessarily leverage at the business strategy level.
And it is important, everybody, listener, it's important.
It is very important work. I think benefits done well and benefits not done well. If you've been in organizations that have done each of those, you definitely know the difference between those two things. And I think that's the thing with HR in general. It's like, you know when it's done well and when it isn't. Yep. I know our conversation has just flown by. We do at the very end just a handful of questions that we call our accelerator round. Are you ready?
I was born ready. I was born for this moment. Let's do it.
Excellent. Love it. First and foremost, though, we love leverage. So, and in particular, high leverage learning with PLA. If you could recommend only 2 resources, whether they're books, newsletters, or something else, to an emerging people leader, what 2 sources would make the cut for you?
What a great question. Well, one, there is a poetry book that is not out yet, but it is coming out very soon. And so maybe actually by February. It's from Marsden Company, and it has been a resource for me. That is my most well-worn book that I have. I'm a big believer in like read things timelessly true to help you maintain that perspective. And poetry to me has always been that for me.
Do you remember the title of that poetry book?
You know, we're going to put a link to it. I think it's called Poetry for the Entrepreneurial Journey, but it is a collection of like John O'Donohue and Rumi and David White, Mary Oliver, that sort of collection of poetry. I'm a big fan of what Andrew's up to, so I think anything he's up to is genuinely worth following. I think it is like all substance, no fluff. I love what Hiba Yusuf does and like the I Hate It Here work. I really like what Hi Bob's up to in their community as well, the In Good Company community. There's a lot of resources. That's where I originally published that ebook as well.
Next question. What one sentence of advice can you share about how to accelerate a successful HR career in today's environment?
Don't go into superhero mode. Learn to delegate.
Short and sweet. Love it. And then back to the mantra. What is your own mantra, whether it's one that you have for the right now or one that you've kept for longer term?
Yeah. I have one that I share publicly and then a private one too that's like mine, but I will share that too. I think calm, steady presence is like one that I share a lot as like my leadership mantra. My personal mantra is breathe courage, which is like what the role that I feel like I play in the lives of other people. Like when I am rooted and strong myself, I am able to breathe courage to give other people that courage to take steps and leaps in their life. So that's usually my before coaching call. I say that to myself, like, this is who you are as a person that does this for others.
That's beautiful. And then last but not least, how can our listeners connect with you?
LinkedIn is a great place for that. I try to share thoughts like almost every day. And then adamweber.co is where you can like learn about my coaching practice. And if you're interested in learning more, that'd be where to go to.
Well, Adam Weber, we appreciate you. Thank you for digging deep. Thank you for sharing some of your secret sauce along the way. If you're interested in learning more about Adam's coaching, maybe being coached by him, check out his website, follow him on LinkedIn. And Adam, thank you so much for your generosity and chatting with us.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jess. It was so fun. Thank you for having me.